Hello and welcome to the Lucid Cafe podcast. I'm your host, Wendy Halley. So yes, this is the first episode of the Lucid Cafe podcast. Really excited to be doing this. Each episode, I'll be bringing you interesting conversations with a variety of people about thought-provoking topics like consciousness and shamanism, psychology, and the nature of reality. You know, really light topics. I love people's stories, how they got to where they are, whether it's a fascinating career path like the episode you're about to listen to, or a powerful healing journey. I'll also be talking with authors like Sandra Ingerman, who's one of the most popular writers and teachers of shamanism. She'll be on the podcast early next year. And I thought it'd be fun, too, to take you along on my entrepreneurial journey as I explore what it takes to make my dream of creating healing environments in virtual reality a physical reality. So that's a taste of what's coming up on future episodes of Lucid Cafe. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I recorded this episode back in September of 2018 when my husband John and I were down in New Jersey visiting family. We connected with an old family friend. Her name is Rachel Cooke, and I thought she would be a great person to interview because she's had an interesting career path. Rachel is a diplomat for the US Department. Even though I've known Rachel for over 20 years, I feel like I don't really know her that well because most of her time has been spent overseas on assignment. So I was thinking that not only would this interview be a great opportunity to get to know Rachel better, but also to learn about what kind of work she's been doing all this time. Much of her time has not been spent with cushy assignments. In fact, she's spent some time in the Middle East, and that was one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to her. I wanted to see what her experience was like working in places like Afghanistan. One thing I discovered about Rachel is that she's incredibly passionate about her work, and she's really good at it. From what I gathered, not everyone is cut out to be a diplomat. And as you'll soon find out, Rachel was quite the trooper when recording this episode. She was dealing with some laryngitis. She said it wasn't painful, but you can definitely hear it in her voice that she was struggling to talk at times. So I appreciate that she was willing to do this despite her vocal challenges. The other thing was that I had brought my laptop down to Jersey and it decided to shit the bed at that time. So I had to improvise and record the episode on an iPad. So the audio quality is not as good as I would have hoped, but it's not horrible. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Rachel Cooke. I am here with Rachel Cooke.
Hey, hi. Good to be here.
Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, Wendy.
Hey, so we're going to just dive right in because I'm curious about your life and you.
Okay, thanks.
Did you end up where you thought you would end up in your life?
I think I have to say yes. Because from the time I was a little kid, all I ever wanted to do was see new places and meet new people, as evidenced in nursery school when I wanted to become friends with the two little girls who I thought were Chinese, and I told my mom it was because I thought I could go to China if I was their friend.
That's adorable. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do that's enabled you to go to China?
So right now I'm currently the U.S. Consul General in Perth, Australia, so I head up our consulate there. Basically, big picture, I'm a U.S. diplomat and have worked all over kind of the greater Asia Pacific region for the last 20 years. But before that, all I wanted to do was travel, meet people, and be able to do some good work that would be beneficial to people's lives. So I was a Peace Corps volunteer early on, right after university. I traveled and studied in Europe. And so all of these experiences kind of combined have led me to where I am now.
So why the Foreign Service?
I didn't even know that the Foreign Service was a thing until my late 20s, even though I had already lived and worked overseas several times. I'd never been to an embassy, not a U.S. embassy or a foreign embassy. I never knew people who did that kind of work. And so for me, in 1998, I think it was, I was sitting in front of the TV watching the news, and I saw the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania get bombed. And I said to the person sitting next to me, God, that's awful. But who were those people, and how did they get cool jobs at an embassy? And what do you think you do if you work in an embassy? And at the time I was in graduate school, and my assistantship was working the front desk of the Career Center. And she said, well, you're the one who works at the Career Center. There's got to be something on the shelves of how you get a job at an embassy and what you do at an embassy. And then she followed that up with, and you're the only person I have ever known who sees something blow up on TV and thinks, I want to work there.
That crossed my mind too.
But I did. And so I did that night when I went into work. I looked it up and I thought, oh, it's the Foreign Service. And all you have to do to join the U.S. Foreign Service is pass a test. Doesn't matter what you studied at university. It doesn't matter if you studied at university. Any American citizen can take the test, and if you have the right set of sort of skills and background and personality type, you'll be selected to basically represent Americans overseas. And I love that about the test. You could have quit high school and spent time in jail and still pass the test. And that means all Americans basically have the opportunity to represent us overseas. And I think that kind of variety is really important. And then the other thing for me, for the Foreign Service, is that I could build a career while still changing things really regularly. I get bored kind of quickly. And so in this career, I move every 1 or 2 or 3 years, a new assignment, a new location, new work, new colleagues, new neighbors, new neighborhood. Everything is different. But my career actually gets to proceed and progress while all that change is taking place. And it's kind of the perfect fit for me.
So the work itself, what was it about the work itself that was intriguing to you?
Going back to when I was a little kid, it's doing the things that I always wanted to do. It's getting to meet people constantly, all different kinds of people from all walks of life, from every corner of the world, who have different expectations, different kinds of lifestyles, and yet at the heart of everything, people are very similar to each other. It doesn't matter if you're a Wall Street banker or a fish farmer in rural Thailand. There are things about your life that are common. And so the opportunity to get to know people all over the world has been fantastic. And then to do my own little part in sort of trying to make things better for people everywhere. So in places like Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan and Afghanistan, all of where I've worked, I get to work on things like getting girls into school, keeping journalists out of jail and trying to support free press, working with local environmental activists to improve the environment in their countries, because these are bigger U.S. priorities that if these things are in place, there'll be more stability in those countries, basically, for those people, and that's better for the United States writ large and for everywhere writ large.
Do you have a political motivation for doing this kind of work?
Not really. My politics kind of has nothing to do with it. People ask me about that frequently. It must be tough to work in politics, or do I love working in politics? And I don't feel like I work in politics at all, actually. I work in relationship building. That's what I do. That's the most important thing of any facet of being a diplomat, is building relationships with people where you're working, so that you can have a long-term, big picture, good relationship between the United States and wherever you happen to be. And so No real political motivation. I just feel lucky that I get to do the work that I do.
All right. So how many different assignments have you had?
So I've had 6 or 7 overseas assignments, and I've done a few domestic assignments in Washington, D.C. as well. So I started off in D.C., and then I went to Kyrgyzstan, then Malaysia, then Afghanistan, then Tajikistan, then Afghanistan again, out west in Herat, which is near the Iranian border, and then 2 assignments back in Washington, and now I'm currently in Australia.
Some of those places are volatile.
Yeah.
What's that been like?
Almost all of those places are volatile, actually. So it's I've mostly worked in dictatorships and war zones, which is partly why I wanted to go to Australia now, to see what other kind of work is like in a sort of modern, democratic, and modern economy. But I love working in the places where there is a lot of social change and maybe political change going on. So I loved working in Afghanistan, but an even better example, I think, is Kyrgyzstan. So it's a country that became a country at the fall of the Soviet Union. It was one of the Soviet republics. So the guy who had been the leader of that republic in the Soviet Union just became the de facto president of the new country. And that happened in all of the Central Asian Soviet republics. But the guy in Kyrgyzstan was sort of more of a benevolent dictator as opposed to perhaps the other countries. And he was a physicist by background, and he allowed civil society to flourish. He didn't shut it down. He actually encouraged more universities to open, more people to go to school out in the rural areas. And the economy was pretty minimal there. There's no seaports. It's a landlocked country. There are no train lines really coming in that could provide goods and services or trade. So it's pretty minimal. And because of that, people really started building a lot of NGOs, organizations that worked on things like education and healthcare and civil society development. And that combination of factors of people basically able to think critically because they were pretty well educated and working in this civil society sector created a situation where there was a revolution in 2005. Yeah, 2005. And I was there as our deputy in our public affairs office at our consulate, or at our embassy, and to see how that process took place, what was going on. There was a parliamentary election. The election was filled with fraud and, problems. And people in civil society really rose up and said, we won't stand for this. We want to be a real democracy, and this is ridiculous. And they basically toppled the dictator in a bloodless coup. Nobody even got hurt. When at one point the military was told to open fire on the protesters, they refused. And
Wow.
And to be there and to see that process happen was really fascinating. And later on, the guy who was the press secretary for the new administration that took over had been a media contact of mine previously. And I was just meeting up with him, and he said to me, the revolution is your fault, right? And I said, what do you mean? The U.S. had nothing to do with the revolution at all.
You didn't mean you personally?
Well, and then he said, no, not you, the United States, you, Rachel Cooke. And I was like, okay, you got to explain to me how the revolution is my fault, basically. And he said, well, over the past 2 years since you've been here, you've opened 14 different libraries with little cafes in them and internet. So this was 2005. Internet was new to Kyrgyzstan. And he said, and this revolution was 100% organized from those internet cafes that you opened.
It was your fault.
And he's like, so it's basically on you, this revolution. And frankly, that's what a thing to be a part of of people taking control of their own destiny and their own government and saying, we want things to be better. We want things to be more equitable, more democratic, and we're going to demand it. And to have a part in that was fantastic. But really, it's everybody. That's US taxpayer dollars that I used to open those internet cafes.
But you had the idea to do that, right? It was your idea. So what was it like to get that feedback personally?
It was pretty exciting. Yeah, frankly, I was kind of like, touchdown.
That's awesome. Yeah, so I could see how you would be pretty jazzed.
Yes.
Yeah, all right. So what's it like to work in some of these areas have been filled with strife. Has it been dangerous at any point? You hear about bombings of embassies.
Sure.
Got your attention originally. So what's that like, the danger level?
So, yeah, I've done 2 separate assignments in Afghanistan, and it was not infrequent that there would be a rocket attack on the embassy compound or a car bomb outside the wall or something like that. And then also my second assignment out in Herat, there was definitely insurgents in town fighting and things like that. It's interesting for me, I just mostly ignored that stuff. And okay, you can't 100% ignore it. You have to go to the bomb shelter basically when there's going to be an attack or when an attack happens, and the sirens go off, you know what you're supposed to do, what you have to do. But I just would, within a short time afterwards, within less than an hour after an event was over, I would just be back at work doing my thing. And I had tons of work to do. We were working 12, 14, sometimes 16-hour days. And you couldn't dwell on the fact that there had been a rocket attack or a car bomb earlier in the day. One day in Kabul, there was an attack early in the morning, not so early, maybe around 9 a.m. And, we went to the bomb shelter, and then probably by 9:45 we were back at our desks. And a few hours later, I went back to my room to get something, and one of the local cleaning women that was around in the hallway, and I was one of the few people on the embassy compound who could speak the local language, so I had gotten to know most of the cleaning staff because I would chat with them all the time. And so I saw this woman, and she was crying, and she just looked so distraught. And I said to her, "What's wrong?" And she said, "I'm just so scared." And I had forgotten all about the bomb. It was hours earlier, right? And it just wasn't a part of my life or in my head anymore. But it really made me realize that, for me, this was a 1-year assignment. I was there, I was going to leave, I was going to go on and do something else. For her, this was her life, her everyday life, for her entire life. She had to deal with stuff like this. And I said to her, "Do you need to call your family? I can give you my cell phone. Do you need to find out if they're okay?" And she said, "No, I've talked to them. Everyone is okay, but I'm just so scared." And it really gave me a completely different perspective on the actual real war that was going on around me, even though I didn't feel like it affected me very much. It, of course, affected everyone for whom that was their home.
Do you think it's sort of a coping skill that you developed to help manage really difficult experiences like that?
I guess so. I don't know if I developed it or if it was just kind of there.
Well, you don't consciously develop a coping mechanism. It just happens.
But I actively chose to kind of ignore the security things or lack of security things that were going on around me. And in Herat, it was even more so because we lived on a military base, and I was my own driver, so we didn't have local drivers, we didn't have local guards. It was considered a fairly stable and secure area of the country, so we had our own armored SUVs, and we drove ourselves around to our meetings and our activities and all the things that we did. And it just, every day I would get an email from our local security team saying, these are the security issues to watch out for today. And very frequently it would be things like, be on the lookout for a white Toyota Corolla that might have a vehicle-borne IED, a vehicle-borne bomb associated with it. Well, every third car on the street was a white Toyota Corolla. So, frankly, I wasn't going to focus on that. I was going from point A to point B to get to a meeting or an activity or whatever it was I was doing. And if a car drove up next to me and blew up, there was nothing I could do about that. So I just didn't focus on it. I had other things to focus on, and that's where I spent my brain power and my emotional energy.
Do you feel like you went into your head, kind of like that's where you would just focus on the tasks at hand?
Yes, I think I almost
an intellectual place.
I had like blinders on. I just focused on the things I needed to focus on. In fact, I was not even particularly aware of like the big picture things going on between the United States and Afghanistan at the time. I was there to help work with the local Ministry of Education to get more girls enrolled in school. I was working with the Ministry of Information to provide more skills to local journalists. I was there to open libraries. I was there to provide more internet access to people. I was there to work with artists and musicians and connect them with American artists and musicians and to do cultural preservation projects. That's what I was there to do, and that's what I did.
Despite what was going on
absolutely
in the country.
Yeah. Yes. So it was wonderful. I got to work on a project where we preserved a building that's called the Citadel. It was built by Alexander the Great. And it's in the middle of Herat, and it's just this gorgeous old fort, basically, that had been used by many different powers over the years, including the Soviets when they were in Afghanistan. And to be able to work with local teams of masons and artists and historians on basically preserving it back to its original state, it was so important for sort of world culture writ large and for the locals in that town and for the United States to build that relationship with those people. So those kinds of projects, to me, they're incredibly valuable in so many ways, and I'm really pleased I had the opportunity to work on them.
Oh, it seems like you're designed, like your makeup, you're designed to do that kind of work.
I feel like I found the right fit.
Yeah.
And I know that not a lot of people really find the right fit for them, but I almost kind of feel like I stumbled into it. But of course, I was looking for things all along the way. And then I also found the right fit in a partner who was willing to do all these things with me. You know, my husband grew up on a farm in Indiana, the first born in America son of immigrants. And he certainly had never lived overseas or traveled to developing countries. He didn't know any of that stuff. So we didn't know if he was going to like it. We didn't know if he was going to be cool with moving every couple of years and all of that. But boy, we lucked out. It's a good fit for him too.
Super fortunate. So I got to ask though, knowing how the psyche works, there's you in this environment that has these potential threats all around you, right? And you're focused on the job at hand. You just get right back to work. But there's this undercurrent of threat. It's there. And knowing what that does to your nervous system, like, did you notice over time that it would wear you down, or that...
I definitely noticed. I'm not sure I noticed that wore me down. I knew I got worn down by the pace of the work. As I said, we were doing 12, 14, 16-hour days, and we were doing them basically 7 days a week. And we got big chunks of time for vacations. But I recognized that at about the 8-week time frame, I would start to be less valuable in this work. I couldn't do it as well. I would burn out more quickly in a day, and I'd become, kind of my personality would get more sharp and more, but not sharp in a good way, sharp in like a kind of a mean way, right? And I would just, be more impatient. If it got to 10 weeks and I still hadn't left for the vacation, it was really a problem. And so I imagine certainly a part of that was the stress of just the whole atmosphere around me. I kind of at the time thought it's just this work level. It's this much time that I have to put in all the time. And I suppose I didn't have to do that. I could have chosen to do less and sleep more or go to the gym or eat better food or whatever. But I didn't. I was pretty much putting all of what I had into the job because I wanted to, because it felt the work was more than rewarding. So I think everywhere I work, the kind of work I do is important and it's interesting and it's rewarding. But in a place like Afghanistan, the work felt more like compelling. I was compelled to do it every day. I wanted to do it. I woke up at 6 a.m. and was online trying to find information for what I needed to do that day. And I was out the door after breakfast and, back at dinner and then working all night to wrap things up for the day. And I wanted to do it all. So, yes, I do think that the level of stress and always knowing in the back of my mind that things were pretty dangerous and bad things could happen at any moment, I'm sure that had an effect.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
But I didn't pay much attention to it. In fact, I was less concerned about things like roadside bombs and more concerned about things like hitting a child on their bicycle, right? There was kind of no road rules. People were just everywhere. The other drivers were everywhere. It was just a mess all the time. So that's what I was more focused on. I didn't want to hit some farmer's sheep or some guy on a donkey or a kid on a bicycle. That was my biggest concern, actually, much more than roadside bombs.
But it sounds like you are kind of the role model for resilience, in a way, if you think about it, right?
I just chose, I did actively choose to focus on what was going right and what was going well. And how could I empower the people who were doing those things? Because I could. I had the ability as a representative of the United States to empower those people. I had money to give them. I had training to give them. I had activities to work with them on that were important for their communities and for their economic development, their stability, their security, their education, all of those things. And I had the ability to do those things. And so that's what I focused on. There were 7,000 things going wrong on any given day, but I chose to not focus on them and to focus on what was going right.
In those times of reprieve, those every 8 to 10 weeks, what did you do to take care of yourself?
I went to the beach. I love the beach, grew up on the beach, so it's like home to me. So every single vacation had a beach element. So in those times of reprieve, we went on vacation, and it's we, because my husband was with me in all of these places, including both Afghanistan tours. And so, sometimes we would go on, we went to Tanzania, for example. My sister joined us, and we went on a safari for a week and saw the animals and took a million pictures, and it was amazing. And then we went out to the island of Zanzibar for a week and basically sat on the beach and went scuba diving and just kind of, really immerse yourself in a vacation. Turn off any devices and just enjoy something completely different than you've ever done before, and sort of make it, elements of it also feel like home, so that you're getting that, for me, when I'm home, I can really just recharge. So I wasn't going to fly all the way home for a vacation, and I wanted to see new things, but I needed to have that recharge element as well. So there was always a beach portion of every vacation to do that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Do you think you would have been as successful single doing this work?
I think I would have been as successful. I don't think I would have been as happy. My husband is an enormous support element. And he does a lot of things that are supportive, like he'll book the flights or he'll organize the whatever that needs to get done so that I don't have to focus on those things. But more so than that, he's a real emotional support in so many ways. So a good example of that is I had a day in Afghanistan, in Kabul, where 4 of my engineers who were building a radio tower for us in the south, the 4 engineers got kidnapped. And they were my engineers. It was my radio tower project. And I needed to take care of the situation. I needed to figure out a way to try to help them and do something to improve the situation. And on the same day, I had a visitor from the United States, an official visitor that I was responsible for as well. And I remember explaining to this visitor that I had just had these engineers kidnapped and I really had to do what I could to focus on them. And the engineers were Turkish. And this visitor said, well, I thought we would only work, help out American prisoners who get kidnapped. And I said, no, they're my engineers. It doesn't matter to me what nationality they are. They're working on my project. They're my responsibility. And Martin basically stepped in, Martin, my husband, stepped in and said to this guy, let me take you to your activities. He basically became the person to coordinate for this visitor because he knew I couldn't do it and he knew I needed somebody to take that role. And so he just stepped in and did it without me talking to him about it. Just he could see what was going on. And he provides that kind of support in every way all the time. So yes, I think I probably would have been pretty successful in this career, but I wouldn't have been as overall happy in life. I know I use the word luck a lot, but I feel really lucky to have him in my life. I didn't grow up in a household where I saw a good relationship like that. And I don't think I ever expected to have a relationship like that. In fact, I expected to be on my own because I thought that would be the easiest thing, the least heartbreaking thing. And it just kind of, as many relationships, it felt like it was sort of out of the blue and just really nice.
That's sweet. Anything surprising about your adventures that you've discovered about yourself?
That's a really tough question because nothing feels surprising to me. When I talk about it to other people find almost everything surprising. For example, many people don't think it's weird or strange or out of the box or surprising that my original background is in marine biology. And they'll say, how in the world did a marine biologist become a diplomat? Well, to me, it was normal, right? It was just the normal path that my life took. So I actually don't find much surprising. I think that there are things that expectations that other people have that I do not see in the real world. So people say to me things like, oh, don't people hate Americans everywhere? And I say, no, I've never met a single person in the world who hated me. And if I had the opportunity to talk to an insurgent in Afghanistan, I imagine I could make them like me, right? So do people maybe dislike big picture American policies? Sure, that happens. But then I can sit there and I can talk with them about it. And I might not at the end of the conversation have them liking that policy, but do they dislike me? No. So, no, I don't think people hate Americans all over the world. I think that people like people everywhere. I think that people are nice everywhere. I think that people are good everywhere. And are there a few bad apples in the world? Yep. And do those people probably have good and nice things about them? Yep, I think that they do. So, I don't know, maybe the surprising thing is that I think people everywhere are pretty lovely, actually.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. I mean, we're so insulated when you don't travel around. Mm-hmm. Someone like me, I don't even have a passport. I've never had the opportunity to travel and haven't pursued it like you have. Mm-hmm. It's hard to know how someone in this country is perceived by someone in another country. You would assume that it may not be pleasant, may not be good, based on what's happening, especially now, politically, in our country.
Yep. I think that, for example, in Australia, the Australians are very focused on American politics. It's in their news every day, and it's something that, of course, people ask me about all the time. And usually the conversation starts off with an Australian saying to me, I know a lot of Americans who live here. I have a lot of American friends, and I really like them. But I just wonder, how is it that America as a big entity feels so different from the Americans who I know? And
good question.
Yeah. And so then I have an opportunity to talk with people about that. Well, what is it about America that concerns you as opposed to the Americans who you know, right? And maybe they'll talk about ask me about gun control, or maybe they'll ask me about healthcare, or maybe they'll ask me about, I don't know, energy development or something like that, right? And then I can talk about those issues individually. I basically have to be an inch deep and a mile wide. I have to know a little bit about everything, but I don't need to be an expert in anything, thank goodness, because I have no interest in that.
I was just wondering about that, because you just covered a lot of ground. So you have to speak on behalf of the American people on
all issues.
Energy development.
Yes, all sectors, all issues. And so I just kind of have to keep on top of what's going on, right? I don't follow the Twitter feeds or things like that, but I might wake up in the morning and go to a breakfast event, and at that breakfast event somebody will ask me about something that was tweeted overnight from the White House or from some other entity. And even if I don't know exactly what was tweeted, I have to be able to talk about that issue in a knowledgeable way for at least a couple minutes, right? And usually if they're more interested than a couple of minutes of conversation, I can say to them, hey, I can have my colleague who knows more about that get back to you, or I can get you some more information about that. And that's fine. That satisfies everybody pretty much. And I like being an inch deep and a mile wide. I didn't go do a PhD because I didn't want to get into anything with that kind of depth. And I like the idea of changing jobs and moving all the time because I have no particular interest in focusing on one thing in one place for a long time. It's just not the way I think, and it's not what makes me happy. So,
what would you say you've learned about yourself? What you know now about yourself versus what you knew when you were 19, say?
Yeah. So I think when I was 19, for example, I definitely thought I was going to be a marine biologist. I definitely thought that I was going to go be an underwater photographer and work with dolphins and all that stuff. And I like how I have let myself develop. I oftentimes refer to myself as a recovering type A. And a lot of type A personalities are so focused on what they're going for that they never give themselves permission to change their own minds or to let themselves do something different from what they're focused on. And I talk to student groups a lot about the benefit of allowing yourself to change your mind. And that can be really tough for a lot of people. For example, there was a time before the Foreign Service where I was working at NASA. Well, who wouldn't want to work for NASA, right? I was in their international office. It seemed like the perfect fit combination of my sort of science background and my international interests. And yet, I got really bored there very quickly. And it's because NASA, by design, takes things slowly. When anything you're working on at NASA is for the launch of something that will take place 5 or 10 years from now. And it has to go right the first time. So it's purposefully slowed down the process so that the engineering is right, the legal work is right, everything, every element has to be right. And it was too slow paced for me.
A recovering type A.
Yes. And I had to be able to explain to my friends, to my family, everybody who thought that this NASA job was going to be the perfect job for me. And I had to be able to explain it to myself, as I also thought it was going to be the perfect job for me. And giving myself that permission to change my mind was a huge leap. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I have maybe developed over time or learned is to how to step back and not be so type A. How to give myself a break, how to give people around me a break, right? Because I'm pretty hard on myself, but I'm also pretty hard on people with whom I work, the people who I care about. I want people to, be at their best. But it's okay to not always be at that level and to be comfortable with that. Took some real thought and effort and a few light bulb moments.
That's some pretty big insight for a young adult, if you think about it. I worked with teenagers as a psychotherapist for a big chunk of years, and I used to talk to them about the decisions they make at 19, who they think they are at 19. is going to be 180 degrees in the other direction by the time they're 29. And so making really big life decisions at that time in your life between like 18 and 21, when you're supposed to know what you want to do with the rest of your life, if you're going to be pursuing college or a career, and you are likely, once you start living your life, are going to change your mind.
Yep.
Even with relationships and stuff, who you think you might want to have a relationship with, you just don't have enough life experience at that point.
Yep.
So living through that, I always say the decade of the 20s should be a time of exploration, of figuring out who you are, because you're not going to be the same person. Because you're just moving away from whatever environment you grew up in. You're moving away from that and figuring out who you are separate from all of that.
Well, I'm glad I took your advice without even knowing you back in my 20s, because, boy, I did a lot of random things. I taught high school science. I was in the Peace Corps. I was waitressing. I worked for the EPA. I lived in New York. I had a lot of different random boyfriends.
Oh, really?
Yes. And, yeah, I jumped all over the place. It wasn't until I was 32 that I joined the Foreign Service. And that's actually the average age of people who join. So I think it's good people have spent that decade of their 20s figuring it out and then think, okay, what I've figured out is the Foreign Service is the right fit for me. And so, yeah, I'm glad I had the opportunity to do that. And it is an opportunity. Not everybody, has the financial stability to do that. I grew up in a family that much of my life was below the poverty level. And so I started working when I was 14 to save my own money so I could do what I wanted. And knowing what I wanted was also a privilege. Right? Lots of people don't know what they want. And somehow I did.
So true. Yeah.
And I had a fantastic mom who really encouraged those things, even though she hadn't had those opportunities. She saw that I could have them and really pushed me toward them in a very positive way.
Were there any pivotal moments in your life where things just like turned on a dime for you?
Whew, that's a good one. So when I was 27, I was in the middle of graduate school, and it was the summer between my 2 years of grad school, and I took a job leading American high school students on a cultural and educational tour of Southeast Asia. Now, I cannot encourage anyone to spend their summer with 15-year-olds, but there was a moment during that trip that I really started thinking about things differently. So I was in the middle of the trip. We were in southern China, hiking in hills not too far from Tibet, and I told the kids to go off on their own with their journals and spend an hour journaling, and then we were going to get back together. And so I was on my own too, sitting there writing in my journal, and I just started thinking about how I was interacting with these kids and how they saw me. And I realized that I was a pretty judgmental person, and I didn't want to be like that anymore. I didn't want to look at people in a way where I was sort of deciding whether they were worthy of whatever was going on in their lives. Then why would anybody want to be like that? Why would anyone want to build relationships from that kind of base? And you can't build relationships that are good with that kind of base. And so I just actively wrote in my journal to think about how to be conscious of how I was thinking about the people around me and the things that they were doing, and basically to give them a break, right? Maybe be a little bit more empathetic or a little bit more sympathetic. I don't know what's going on in their lives, and to not judge what's going on, or at least try to do it much less. So for me, I don't know where that came from. I don't know why at that moment I thought that, but I did. And then it was kind of the when you know better, you do better. I had never really thought about it before, but now that I had thought about it, I couldn't go back. I had to actively consider that as I was moving forward in my life.
It's a good fucking answer.
Thanks. And then one of the poor kids got altitude sickness, and so we had to go search for him because he didn't come back to meet us all when we were supposed to meet. Oh my God, it was awful. can't lose a kid in China. I can't. Parents will be very unhappy.
But it's cool you got to go to China after having those friends when you were a child.
Yep. Yeah. So I've never worked in China, but I've managed to go there a few times on vacation or, it's part of these groups. And yeah, I'm very glad I had the opportunity to go.
Favorite place?
Favorite place in the whole world besides the beach in Lavallette, New Jersey, which is where I grew up. Halong Bay, Vietnam. So Halong Bay is in the north of Vietnam off the coast, of course it's bay. And it's an area with hundreds, probably thousands of these little limestone islands that are kind of tall and skinny and overgrown with tropical plants. And because they're limestone, they wear away quickly. So there's these overhangs at the water line. And they're gorgeous. And the whole area is so beautiful. It's like a dreamscape. I first went in 1992. At that time, there really wasn't a lot of tourism in Vietnam, but I was living in Thailand as a Peace Corps volunteer, so made my way over there. And you couldn't even get out to Halong Bay because there were no bridges yet to get there. You had to take a series of ferries and little boats and whatever. And my friend and I just kind of made our way out there over a couple of days, and then there's nowhere to stay at the time, and we saw a man with a fishing boat, and he had a woman there with him who appeared to be his wife, and they had a dog, and so we decided that couple would probably be a safe couple to approach, and we didn't know any Vietnamese, and we basically just made them understand that we wanted to go out on their boat with them if they would take us. And they did, and we spent 3 days on their boat, sleeping on their boat, and helping them fish and watching what they were doing, and going swimming and climbing on the islands, and it was just magical. And I've been back a lot of times, and now there's lots of tourists who go there, and there's a whole tourist infrastructure there. But still, if you can get away from that and get out into the middle of the islands, it's so beautiful, and the people are so lovely. And yeah, I love it there.
Now, you painted a pretty beautiful picture.
Thank you.
That kind of makes me think of your exposure to different cultures. What do you think American culture could benefit from
when a good question.
Exposed to other cultures?
Well, I think that everybody benefits from everybody else, really. The more you're exposed to, the more you understand the world writ large. There are things about American culture that I love that other places don't have, and then there are, of course, things about other places that I love that we don't have so much here in the States. So I kind of love how, in many places, people are a little bit less focused on consumerism, and they're more focused on their families. I think, honestly, it's a way that life might have been here in the States, a pretty long time ago. And do I think that those other places may be moving toward a more consumerism society? Yes, I do. And does that mean that they will be less family focused? Yes, it probably does, because it means the children will move to the cities to get jobs and that sort of thing. But I do really love that sort of lifestyle that you still see in a lot of places where people take in the grandparents and the aunts and the uncles, and they're all living in the same community or the same home or the same compound kind of place. So the kids are involved with the adults in a lot of different ways, and I really like that a lot. The thing that I like about American culture and American society that I don't see in a lot of other places is the willingness to take risks, which creates a culture of innovation, right? So everywhere I go, people have iPads and iPods, even in really remote places. People are wearing American brands. I've been in the middle of nowhere and seen people with Mickey Mouse shirts on or whatever, right? There are things about American innovation that touch everyone's lives in a positive way, and that people like and they think is exciting. And it's because in America, we're willing to take risks, and we don't put people down really if they fail. That means they tried, and we encourage them to try again. And that's not very common in other places. Most societies, people feel like if they're going to try something, it has to be successful, or else their community isn't going to support them. And so that's something I really love about here.
It's almost the opposite of what you were talking about. What you really admire in other cultures is that togetherness and the strong sense of family and not wanting to let each other down. Mm-hmm. And here, we're very independently minded.
Yes.
Which enables us to take these risks. But we lack the connection.
Yes, oftentimes, for sure.
Yeah, I wonder if it's possible to have both.
Right, I don't know if it's possible to have both. But as an American, we have the opportunity to immerse ourselves in both, and that's an enormous opportunity, right? You can be an American and go and live in a rural community in a developing country and see that lifestyle and become a part of it. But you still have sort of these risk-taking sensibilities that were just a part of your life as you were growing up. And in fact, going to that rural community is the risk, right? There are definitely things that I find admirable everywhere I go, and things that, most people wish would change in their own societies and wish would become different or better or improved in some way. There's, of course, no perfect place, right?
And I imagine that insight you had around judgment has really helped you to be able to see all of that stuff. Because if you go in with if you have a judgment about a culture, you're going to go into that and you're going to be blinded to the big picture.
Right now, I'm doing some reading about personal biases, right? And
they're huge.
And what I find, the word bias, generally, at least in American English, has a sort of negative connotation. But I have a lot of positive biases, and I have to be aware of them. So have I interacted with people who were not on the up and up, not, being straight with me? Absolutely. But I actually went into that conversation with a sort of positive bias, giving them the benefit of the doubt before anything transpired. And then it was hard for me to see that they were not worthy of that benefit of the doubt, and that I needed to be a little bit more strategic with them. I had to think about what they were saying in a different way. So having a positive bias is also a bias, right? And so it's important for me to recognize that and just be aware of that as I go about my work and my everyday life.
Do you have a legacy that you'd like to leave?
It would be great if people, I have a lot of nephews and nieces and people like that, if they feel like they want to be like me, because I want to be admired for doing admirable work, for doing admirable things with my life. That's how I want to spend my life. But I also have an element of actually wanting to be recognized for that, right?
Pretty human.
And several of my nephews and nieces have said, oh, I really want to be like you. I would like to do that. And that makes me feel really good, that I think that I have made good choices that provide a positive sort of energy in the world. And I would like the legacy to be that other people see that and think, I want to be like that. I want to do that too. And then I can talk to them about how it's making conscious choices. It's not just having things come at you, right? You have to decide to be positive or do this kind of important work that makes a difference to people, and not just in developing countries, but just in your own communities, right? You can do all sorts of good things that help people around you, sometimes without them even knowing it.
You speak with certainly a degree of confidence. Do you feel like you've always been a confident person?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
From the womb?
Yeah. I don't ever remember not. It's not that I didn't believe in myself or not believe in myself. It just was. It just is the way it is.
Wow.
Right?
We could all use a little dose of that.
When I was a kid, I was the girl in the 1970s, right, who was into science and math. And I, once again, feel like there's an element of luck here. I did not have teachers who said to me, girls don't do science, or girls can't be an astronaut, or whatever. If people said that to me, I simply don't remember it. It didn't click that they were talking about me, right? And I also don't remember my mom saying things to me like girls can do anything they want and girls are strong. No, I don't remember her saying those kinds of things. It was just like, oh, you want to do this? Well, this is how we do it. Let's talk about how we can do that. I remember as a young teenager, 13, 14 years old, wanting to be able to go on a school trip that was to France and Switzerland. And we didn't have money to do things like that. And I didn't know anyone who had ever had a passport or traveled overseas, but I wanted to do it. And my mom said, well, let's figure out how you do it. How much money is it? What do you need to make? How can you make that money? And she helped me get a job waitressing and getting the approvals because I was only 14 to be able to work and all that stuff. And then I worked toward it. I raised the money. I paid for the trip. I went on the trip. I remember very fondly my mother and I going to Philadelphia, which was a big deal, to go to the passport agency to get me a passport. And she got one too. And it was like really huge deal for us. Yeah, so it was never like, that's not possible or you should try to do everything. It was, what do you want to do? You want to do that? Okay, let's talk about how we can make that happen, or how can we do that? Or if you can't do it, why is that? Not just sort of this ambiguous, you can or can't do things, but really kind of very specifically.
Do some problem solving, try to figure it out, be creative.
Yeah.
What kind of advice would you give someone who's struggling with believing in themselves or confidence if they have these big dreams but they don't necessarily feel like they can?
Well, I think already by having big dreams, they're already halfway there, because a lot of people don't even have big dreams.
But I don't know. I don't know. I mean, in this culture, maybe that's because that's all I'm exposed to, is that it's the culture of big dreams, maybe. But maybe in the rest of the world, because we're the American dream, right? You can do and be whoever you want to be, but maybe that's not the case in other cultures.
It's interesting because I'm not sure I'm actually a very good person to give people advice on how to be confident, because I don't feel like I ever went from not being confident to being confident. I just feel like I've always sort of been this way.
I could see you giving very practical advice. Just do it.
Yeah, exactly. And I also don't feel like I was dreaming big as a kid, because, once again, nobody ever said it that way. When I remember as a little kid saying to my mom, I want to be a marine biologist. Well, I grew up on an island. I didn't know what a diplomat was, but I did know what a marine biologist was, and it seemed attainable to me. I also didn't have siblings. I have a lot of siblings, but they didn't go to university. They didn't have that kind of lifestyle. But I was told a lot when I was a kid that I was smart, and oftentimes that I was the smart one, which isn't very kind to my siblings, right? But that I was the smart one. And so I think there was a certain amount of expectations put on me. But at the same time, I didn't think that it was a dreaming big to go to university and become a marine biologist. It just was what I was going to do. So I do encourage people to dream big, actually, because there's no reason not to. What's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is that they say no, or that something doesn't happen the way you want it to happen. So, okay, it's important to have sort of plan B and backup plans, but not to think of them as inferior plans. Just other plans, right? And other options. And kind of, in a way, almost all options are good options. So the advice for confidence, gosh, I'm not sure I can answer that.
No, I think you already kind of had. It seems like injecting ourselves with a little bit of Rachel, the idea that making your doubts really small and just pursuing it regardless.
You're reminding me about the what if questions. So I feel like people oftentimes don't give themselves permission to go ahead because they ask these what if questions. What if it doesn't go right? What if things go wrong? What if things fall apart? And so then they just don't do it. But they haven't actually gone to the end of the what if question. They haven't answered it. Kind of like my mom sitting down with me and coming up with creative solutions of how to get to where I wanted to go. Not just on the traveling, but like how was I going to pay for university? Like all these things, right? There are a lot of stumbling blocks along the way. But instead of just saying, well, it could go wrong, so I'm not going to go there, say, well, what if this bad thing happens? Okay, well, then you'll have this situation, and how will you handle that situation to turn it around? Right? Actually go through the process of answering the what if question. And really, to me, the answer is almost, what if something goes wrong? What if somebody says no? Then they say no and you do something differently. Or then they say no and you try to convince them to say yes by doing X, Y, or Z. Right? Like, just go through the process of answering the question. And that'll give you more confidence to move ahead.
Well, it's guaranteed that shit's not going to go the way you want it to. That's just how life works. And I think what ends up happening is that a lot of people bail the moment something doesn't happen the way that they wanted it to happen. They bail. But I can see the exercise of asking what if and going through that process is helpful. But even your imagining of how it could go wrong is probably not the way in which it's going to go wrong. But you have this kind of process or this plan or strategy in your mind, which maybe is a good strategy, but I wonder if people can get really thrown if it doesn't go, like kind of that worst case scenario thinking where you think of all the possible ways in which something could go wrong, and then I'm going to try to prepare for each possibility, and then it goes wrong, it goes south in a completely different way. The idea just to be open, and as a pretty new small business owner, this is a skill that I'm getting to exercise because there's a lot riding on my success, because I owe people money and I also want it to be successful.
Right.
So when I'm hit with a challenge, it's really encouraged me to think super creatively about, well, there's got to be some way to overcome this.
And sometimes I think because we're an individualistic society, we oftentimes want to solve our own problems by ourselves. And I think that's a natural go-to. But it's also really important to recognize the value of getting other people to help you. And so you only think the way that you think. And okay, maybe you can Google stuff and come up with other ideas that didn't naturally come to your brain, but there's only so much of a perspective that you have based on your experience, your education, your lifetime, your surroundings. And by bringing in people who think differently, who have a different perspective, who see things in a way that you might not be able to see them, then you get new solutions, new opportunities, new options. And so you were mentioning to me, Wendy, that you're part of a kind of a women's business group.
Yep.
And those women have different kinds of businesses from you. They have different experiences from you. Maybe some of them have been in business for 10 years. Maybe some of them have been in business for 1 year. And they just have different ideas and options and solutions to problems. And you provide them with your experience and your ideas and your solutions. And so, okay, I think we do try to solve our problems ourselves. But if that's not making it happen for you, then it's valuable to reach out to other people. And it's not a weakness in any way. People want to help and they want your assistance in return. And that's universal.
That's a great point, too, because I'm thinking, as one of the things I've learned is where I have shortcomings, I need to find people who have that skill to be able to help me out, because I'm definitely not. Yeah.
So this is something that I think people who sort of maybe lack confidence can help themselves in developing confidence, is working on understanding and articulating what their value is. What value do you bring to activity X or community Y? Right? And people don't think about themselves that way. They don't know how to articulate that. But working on that, maybe journaling, what values do you have? What value do you bring to the world, to your family, to your community, to your workplace, right? And
but you have to have confidence to even
start doing it.
Yeah.
But you have to start doing it, right?
Exactly.
So there's got to be a point where that happens. And the example I have is I wouldn't be in the Foreign Service if I hadn't had that insight into myself and the ability to articulate it. In the final round of the Foreign Service exam process, there's oral exams, and much of it is like a traditional interview. And the person looked at my background and they said to me, "Why do we want a marine biologist in the Foreign Service? What value is that to us?" And I said, "Look, if you have a bunch of people sitting around a table trying to solve some big international problem, and everybody at that table has a background in international relations or political science or law, you're going to get the same solutions to that problem over and over again. But I think like a scientist. I think differently. I have a different perspective. I have a different set of experiences and background, and I will come up with different solutions to that problem. And that's the value that I will bring to the Foreign Service." So basically, I talked my way into the service.
Nice.
You have to be willing to think about yourself in that way, and that's a little uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Well, I think on that note, this has been great.
Well, and you're bringing value to the podcast world by providing these kinds of interviews. I look forward to hearing all the people that you interview. And thank you for interviewing me, even though my voice is a complete mess today.
Yeah, I was going to thank you actually for doing this despite being on the edge of laryngitis.
Yes.
Yeah. No, this has been great, Rachel. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you too, Wendy. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Lucid Cafe podcast. Got some episodes coming up that I'm really excited to share with you with some super interesting people. So stay tuned. Thanks a million. Have a super day.